Danish had always been drawn to the unknown. Even before marriage, he and his friends sought out haunted locations, places where shadows whispered and the air grew thick with an unnatural stillness. One such place was Old Funch, a desolate stretch of road where legends spoke of a girl betrayed, murdered, and left to wander in endless torment. They said if someone uttered the word birthday in that cursed place, she would appear, bringing horrors beyond comprehension. That night, Danish and his friends drove to Old Funch in 2 cars, laughing, reckless, eager to summon whatever lay hidden. At the stroke of midnight, they turned off their headlights, standing in the heart of the darkness. Then, with a mix of bravado and fear, they shouted in unison, "Happy birthday!" The silence was deafening. But when nothing happened, they scoffed and turned back towards their cars. It was then that the first strange occurrence unfolded. A car lost control, slamming into the other, though no one had touched the wheel. A friend screamed, claiming to have seen a figure, a shadow with tangled hair, whispering in an unknown tongue. Their cars refused to start. The sensors flickered wildly, as if something unseen was pacing in front of them. Danish stepped out, expecting a prank, but the moment his foot touched the ground, something unseen shoved him hard. His forehead struck the windshield, cracking the glass. The weight of the night grew heavier, suffocating. Phones lost signal, voices turned hoarse with fear. Desperate, they abandoned their cars and walked towards a distant farmhouse, hoping for help. As they neared the house, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was impossibly tall, draped in white, its face featureless. Then, without warning, it charged at them, its speed unnatural, inhuman. Panic surged through the group. As they fled, one friend collapsed, her body unmoving, impossibly heavy. Even as they pulled at her limbs, she remained rooted to the ground, as if claimed by something unseen. Only when they recited Ayatul Kursi did her weight suddenly lessen, allowing them to drag her away. The next morning, when they returned for their cars, all the windows were shattered. On the windshield, written in what looked like blood, was a single message. "Happy birthday to you." Far away in London, Naveed and his friend traveled through a deserted countryside road late at night. They saw a flickering red light in the distance, standing alone in the inky blackness. As they drew closer, they realized it was not a vehicle, nor a lamp, but a man. His bicycle was loaded with rusted tiffin carriers, and as the headlights illuminated his face, something within Naveed recoiled. His skin was deathly pale, his hair long and unkempt, and his eyes, an unnatural, glowing green. When their gazes locked, Naveed felt an excruciating pain in his chest, as if something unseen had latched onto his soul. He tried to recite Ayatul Kursi, but the figure grinned, shaking his head, as if he could hear every whispered word. The moment they passed him, the figure disappeared. But the next morning, when Naveed looked in the mirror, his own eyes bore the same eerie green hue. Mahin's daughter Fiza had always been fearless. But on one fateful night, she awoke screaming, her body convulsing violently. The voice that escaped her lips was not her own, it was deep, guttural, full of rage. She slammed her own body against the walls, as if possessed by something unseen. Her family watched in horror as she whispered in a language they could not understand, a voice that belonged to no human. A religious scholar was summoned, his presence sending waves of resistance through the room. He recited verses from the Quran, and only then did Fiza fall silent. The next morning, she had no memory of the night before. But deep, bloody scratches covered her back, marks that had not been there when she slept. Abdul Rauf had always been skeptical of supernatural tales, dismissing them as the work of overactive imaginations. That changed one cold December night when he encountered something beyond his comprehension. After attending a late-night wedding, he lingered with friends at a roadside tea stall until the early hours. As the streets emptied, he began his walk home, the silence unnerving but familiar. Just before he reached his house, he noticed an old woman sitting behind a tree, murmuring to herself. Her voice was barely a whisper, but something about the way her lips moved sent a chill through his spine. He froze. She did not look at him, did not acknowledge his presence, until he turned to leave. Then, in a voice that barely belonged to this world, she whispered, "Stay a while." The moment those words reached his ears, a heavy weight settled on his chest, his limbs trembling with an invisible force. He ran. No matter how fast he moved, the air behind him grew colder, heavier, pressing down like unseen hands trying to pull him back. By the time he burst through his front door, his father had already sensed something was wrong. Within days, Abdul Rauf fell mysteriously ill. He lost weight, his skin paled, and no doctor could explain his condition. His father, a deeply spiritual man, took him to a religious scholar. The scholar listened, nodded grimly, and uttered words that sent a new wave of dread through Abdul Rauf. "She marked you." The cure required constant recitation of prayers, a process that took weeks before he finally recovered. But even now, in the quietest moments of the night, he feels the weight of invisible eyes watching him.